Two patrol cars pulled up outside Emily Carter's home just after sunrise, while the HOA president stood beside them, firmly pointing toward the front door. What unfolded over the next 10 minutes would leave the entire neighborhood stunned and uncover a federal rule that changed everything. Emily Carter had spent 6 years living in the calm community of Brookstone Meadows. Her modest suburban home wasn't extravagant, but it carried a sense of comfort and warmth. Each morning, she would step outside to water the flowers lining her walkway as neighbors passed by with their dogs, exchanging friendly waves. Her husband, Daniel Carter, often worked long hours as an engineer, yet both of them cherished quiet, peaceful street they called home. Things began to shift when a new HOA president stepped in. Karen Whitmore believed every rule should be enforced exactly as written, with no room for flexibility. At first, the issues seemed minor: small notices about the color of the mailbox, warnings about a garden bench placed too close to the porch. But over time, the letters became more serious. Karen accused Emily of violating HOA regulations by running an unauthorized business from her home. Emily was completely confused. She wasn't operating any business at all. She simply worked remotely for a nationwide company, handling customer service calls from her laptop inside the living room. Daniel reached out to the HOA, hoping to clear up the misunderstanding, but Karen refused to reconsider her stance. Just 3 days later, she made a decision that shocked the entire neighborhood. She contacted the police and insisted that Emily needed to be removed from the property immediately. What Karen didn't realize was that federal law was about to stop her plan instantly. The officers approached the front door calmly. Emily answered with a puzzled look, still holding her morning coffee. Standing behind them was Karen Whitmore, clutching a folder filled with documents. Karen spoke first, explaining that multiple violations had been issued and claiming Emily refused to follow neighborhood rules. According to her, the situation had escalated to the point where Emily should be removed from the home. The officers listened carefully and then asked Emily if she understood the complaint. She nodded politely before explaining something Karen clearly hadn't anticipated. Emily worked from home because she had been granted a federal accommodation through her employer. A medical condition made commuting extremely difficult, so her company allowed her to perform her job remotely. Her work required nothing more than a laptop and a headset. No clients ever came to the house. No signs were displayed outside. It was simply quiet computer work. The officers exchanged a brief glance. Karen insisted that HOA rules prohibited businesses from operating within homes, but Emily calmly clarified there was more to the situation. At that moment, Daniel stepped outside holding a printed document, and the entire conversation began to shift. The paper he carried referenced federal protections Karen had completely overlooked. He handed it to one of the officers. It was an official accommodation approval connected to federal disability law, clearly stating that Emily's remote work arrangement was protected accommodation under federal regulations. This meant her employer had every right to allow her to work from home to support her health needs. More importantly, the document made something very clear. Local housing associations could not block reasonable accommodations tied to federally protected rights. The officer read the letter carefully before turning to Karen and asking if the HOA had reviewed any federal guidelines before issuing their demand for removal. Karen hesitated, insisting again that HOA rules strictly prohibited businesses in residential homes. But the officer calmly explained something that shifted the entire situation. HOA rules could not override federal protections. By now, the street had fallen quiet as neighbors slowly gathered outside, watching everything unfold. Karen's confident stance began to weaken as the situation she believed was straightforward enforcement turned into a serious legal mistake. The second officer stepped forward and spoke in a calm, steady tone. He explained that Emily was not breaking any laws by working remotely. Many people across the country work from home, especially when medical accommodations were involved. The key concern was whether her activity caused any disruption in the neighborhood. In Emily's case, there were no visiting customers, no extra cars, no business signs, just a laptop and a series of phone calls. The officer then looked directly at Karen and explained that trying to remove someone from their home without proper legal authority could lead to serious consequences for the HOA. Karen's expression shifted from confidence to unease. She began flipping through her folder, searching for something to support her claims. But none of her documents addressed federal accommodation protections. Daniel stood quietly beside Emily on the porch. He had expected another argument with the HOA, but not police officers explaining federal housing law to the HOA president. Across the street, neighbors whispered among themselves as they watched. Karen slowly realized that the situation she had tried to control was slipping out her hands, and what happened next would determine how the entire conflict ended. She attempted one final argument, claiming that the HOA board had voted to enforce the rule and that she was simply following community guidelines. However, the officers explained that even HOA boards must follow federal law. Community rules could never override federally protected accommodations. One of the officers handed the document back to Daniel before addressing Karen directly, suggesting that the HOA review federal housing regulations before taking any further action. Otherwise, the association could face serious legal challenges. Karen's face grew pale. The neighbors standing on their lawns understood exactly what had just happened. The HOA president had tried to force a resident out of her own home, and the law had immediately stopped it. Without saying another word, Karen quietly gathered her papers and walked back toward her car. The officers gave Daniel and Emily a polite nod before returning to their patrol vehicles. Slowly, the street returned to its calm morning routine, but the story of what had happened spread quickly throughout the neighborhood. It was clear that the next HOA meeting would be one of the most important the community had ever seen. A week later, the Brookstone Meadows clubhouse was completely packed. Every chair was filled as residents gathered for the monthly HOA meeting, eager to hear what the board would say about the incident. Karen Whitmore sat quietly at the front table, no longer carrying the same confidence she once had. Daniel and Emily took seats near the back of the room. When the meeting began, another board member stood up and addressed the situation. He explained that the association had carefully reviewed federal housing regulations. Following the police visit, the board acknowledged that Emily's remote work was indeed a protected accommodation. The enforcement action had been a mistake. The room remained silent as he continued, stating that the HOA would update its policies to ensure nothing like this would happen again. Several neighbors nodded in agreement. Daniel glanced at Emily, and for the first time in days, she looked completely at ease. What had started with threats and police cars was ending in a very different way. As the meeting came to a close, Karen Whitmore slowly stood up. Her voice was quieter than usual as she admitted she had acted too quickly while enforcing the rules. She acknowledged that she had not fully understood the federal protections involved in Emily's situation. The room remained calm as several residents thanked Daniel and Emily for handling everything respectfully. Instead of turning the situation into a major legal battle, they had simply presented the facts and allowed the law to speak for itself. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood changed in subtle but meaningful ways. The HOA updated its guidelines and improved communication with residents. Emily continued working peacefully from home, returning each morning to water the flowers along her walkway. Neighbors passed by once again, smiling and waving just like before. What began as a tense and emotional conflict ended with a lesson the entire community would never forget. Sometimes, the strongest solutions don't come from arguments, but from understanding the rules that protect everyone. And that was a final twist in this unforgettable HOA story. If you enjoyed the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It really helps the channel grow.